Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dana Bash of CNN and Nancy Pelosi, House Democratic leader, to the stage.
Thank you all. Which one? Okay. We were shaking hands with the previous guests.
Give me one while I tuck in my technology here. It's so nice to be with you.
My pleasure.
Great to be
Thank
here.
you, Dana.
So my first question is, the big story in Congress this week is Donald Trump coming to meet with congressional leaders. So what time is your meeting?
I've come here to talk about the budget and how we are not going to be able to reduce our deficit and reduce our debt with the Trump tax cuts for the rich. As I said this morning, we had a press event this morning in which we made the point that this meeting is taking place on Capitol Hill. I hope this is all we talk about the campaign, because we've come here to talk about the budget and to thank Pete Peterson for his leadership and focusing the nation's attention on the need to do that. Since you asked a political question, I will respond by saying we had a press event this morning with our top leadership in the House Democratic Caucus. And what we said was, it's very interesting that the Republican establishment is now so shocked by the rhetoric of Donald Trump and the other presidential candidates, and now he's the presumptive nominee. Since when? Because everything he has said, whether it's about birthers and being a birther and disrespecting the president, disrespecting women in his rhetoric, immigrants, Muslims, LGBT, we hear that every day in the Congress. That's par for the course. In the House and our press event, which was in the Capitol, we couldn't do a split screen on it because that would be political, but we did show what officially our members have been saying in that regard. So our question is, since when? This is amazing that when chairs of committee have had this spewed forth this vitriolic attitude toward Muslims, for example, Peter King of New York, he was the chair of the Homeland Security Committee. He took that vitriol into his committee, into legislation, to the floor. He had power, but they never said boo. Right now, Donald Trump has influence, but he doesn't have power, and I don't think he ever will. But nonetheless, they didn't ever say boo when people with power were not only saying these things, but acting upon it. And now they're shocked, a la Casablanca, that there's gambling going in here. You're all too young to know what that reference is. Shall we talk about the budget?
Yes, I do have more political questions, but let's talk about some issues that I know that a lot of people here want to hear about. One thing that I'm certain that they want to hear about is an op-ed that you wrote a few months ago, I think maybe the end of last year, about ways to reduce the national debt. And you had this great idea of going back to the future and reinstalling Pago.
Right. Well, it's really important in the context of public policy. Of course, public opinion is so important. And in public opinion, it's almost counterintuitive that Democrats are the party of deficit reduction, would you say? And so it was important for me in that op-ed to talk about 30 years ago, before some of you were born or paying attention to these issues, George Miller, then a young member of Congress from California, went to the Democratic Convention in 1982. It was a midterm convention in Philadelphia. Proposed a resolution for pay as you go. You want to buy something, you want to pay, you want to cut a tax, how are you going to pay for it? You want to invest in something, how are you going to pay for it? So pay as you go became our mantra. We knew that the deficit had to come down, we had to reduce the debt. Debt service was like money down the drain because we weren't getting anything for it. So that would be another argument why we needed to get rid of it. And of course, that was in the Reagan years. That was in the Reagan years, but progressive Democrats were saying, we've got to get rid of this debt. And Pago was our approach to it. It became sort of part of the Budget Act of 1986, but it really didn't come into, well, President George Herbert Walker Bush had it as part of his budget agreement, but it didn't come into full bloom until President Clinton became president, and then pay-as-you-go became the rule on how we would go forward. So again, if you want to have a tax cut, how do you pay for it? If you want to make an investment, how do you pay for it? And coming out of the Clinton years, you know, we want a path to reducing the debt in a very significant way, a path of $5.4 trillion, path down. President Bush came in, threw Pago out the window, and I respect and love the Bush family, so there's nothing personal, but threw Pago out the window, tax cuts for the high end, prescription drug bills gave away the store to the industry, and 2 unpaid for wars. And the deficit turned around an $11 trillion swing, the biggest of any president to have that big a swing in the debt. President Obama comes in, when he stands on the steps of the Capitol, January of 2009, the deficit is $1.4 trillion. It is now reduced to what, this year, 544. So nearly a 70% reduction in the deficit because we went back to pay as you go. And you mentioned that the New York Times cut out my suggestions for responding to Mr. Peterson's beautiful call. I'm sure you've seen it on TV where they say, this is what's happening is preventing growth because the growth of the deficit is preventing our economic growth. What are your suggestions? They didn't want to put my suggestions in, but I just wanted to put in there the idea that pay-go is a very important way.
How realistic is it in this environment? Or is it really hard to answer that question because we don't know what's coming in 6 months?
Well, no, I think the American people would believe that pay-as-you-go is a good way to go. One way to go in terms of pay-go is to subject, we believe that the budget should be a statement of our national values. What is important to us as a nation should be how we allocate our resources. And we have the president's budget, a path to prosperity, as contrasted by whatever's going on the Republican side. The budget is so bad, but not bad enough for them to come. But hopefully we can, as our previous guest had said, come to the table with shared values and come up with a budget that is represents our values. Now, I'm an appropriator, so when the chairman of the budget committee says do away with the budget committee, that might be okay with me. but appropriators have live in a world of their own. That's one place I was forged in Congress. But pay-as-you-go makes all the sense in the world. And as I say, even 86 under President Reagan and late 80s, early 90s under President George Herbert Walker Bush, it influenced the bipartisan debate then. I believe when you have a debate on the budget, you bring your values to the table, but you're agnostic as to what some of the solutions might be. They might come from the right, they might come from the left, but your goal is to meet the needs of the American people in a way that reduces the deficit, creates growth, creates good paying jobs, and that's the test we should put the budget to. Some of the ways that we could reduce the deficit is to subject the tax expenditures. There are over $1 trillion of tax, some would say $1.4 trillion of what are called tax expenditures. That's spending on revenue cuts, tax expenditures. Some of them are worthy, like the deduction of interest on your home loan, that kind of thing, state, local taxes and stuff. But put them all outside the door and let them in one at a time, because over half of them are just total giveaways. And they increase the deficit, do not create growth, and are just special interest giveaways that are have been carved out in the dark of night in Gucci golf outside the Ways and Means Finance Committee.
That leads to my next question, which is any kind of tax reform to deal with all of that in a comprehensive global way?
Well, I would hope, and you have to come to the table in a bipartisan way to do that, and we had hoped that would be what they would want to do, but we haven't seen that overture yet. But I'm disappointed in Democrats and Republicans, as a matter of fact, who voted for the tax extender bill in December, We had a tax expander bill. Instead of preparing us for going to the table with, again, be agnostic, what works, what doesn't work, what creates growth, what creates good paying jobs, what reduces the deficit, what is fairness and simplicity. Instead, as a first step, it was proposed by the majority that we have this tax extender bill. The tax extender bill gave away around $700 billion in tax cuts, unpaid for, no pay as you go, unpaid for, and made permanent, not even counting the debt service on the $700 billion. And so that really ties your hands around behind your back if you're going to go to the table and objectively see what works for growth, deficit reduction, and job creation.
And Leader Pelosi, I know you have been working with Speaker Ryan on some kind of deal to help Puerto Rico.
Yes.
But I think you said earlier today you guys are getting close. But
I believe the Speaker is working in good faith on that. Yeah.
So that sort of brings me to the obvious question. You're talking about Pago. You're talking about tax reform. What is your working relationship like with Speaker Ryan now that he's been there for a couple months? Do you think that he is a partner you can work with on these big issues?
Well, first let me just say on Puerto Rico, you mentioned in the context of it, but it doesn't cost one penny. I wish that it did have Medicaid in there because I think that would be really important to the recovery of Puerto Rico, and the recovery of Puerto Rico, it reduces immigration to the United States, it reduces other costs that can come from not having, but it doesn't have that in there. So it's only policy to restructure their debt in a way that helps their recovery. So he can legitimately say to his caucus and to the public, and so can we, this is not a cost to the taxpayer, this particular restructuring. I have a great deal of respect for the Speaker, as I did, and have a good working relationship with the former Speaker, with John Boehner. We tried to find our common ground where we could. We recognized our differences as respectfully. And it's just interesting to see what's happening now with the budget, because I really do not believe that the Ryan budget is a budget that reflects the values of our country, ending the Medicare guarantee for one. I don't think the American people think that that's a statement of their values. But again, that's what our founders intended. Marketplace of ideas. Come here, debate them, respect the power of your own thinking, but have the humility to respect other people's views and that they might have a better idea. But his budget is, I think, not a good budget in terms of reflecting the values of our country, but it's not even bad enough for his Tea Party constituents in his own. So that's why they haven't supported it, because it isn't bad enough. So again, it always comes back to, yes, personally there's respect, and I try to be as helpful as I can be, not to, to give room, to give room for some things to happen. But then we have our areas of disagreement, and again, that's from the start of our country.
You mentioned Medicare. I know this is different from what you were talking about, but on the topic of Medicare, Hillary Clinton said this week that she's in favor of allowing younger people, maybe she didn't give a specific age, but maybe 50 to 55, to voluntarily buy into Medicare. That's a move to the left for her. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I think that would have been, I think it's an idea that we have to look at, see what the costs are, what it means to the person, and I think it goes in the right direction. We almost had that in the Affordable Care Act. We lost by one vote in the Senate, and the 60-vote rule. And however, with the Affordable Care Act, there almost are better plans for people in that age group. So people have to look and see, am I better under Medicare? They have to buy into it, and they have to buy into the Affordable Care Act too.
So you think it's a good idea now, or
well,
not?
I think that we have to see what the costs are, what it means to people. If you I don't know if anybody is 55 in this room, but if you're 55 and you want to do that, you have to look and see, am I better off with that, or am I better off just buying into the plan under the Affordable Care Act? Because under the Affordable Care Act, you're covered. People on Medicare have to buy supplemental plans and the rest of that, so people have to make their own decision. But the manner in which he has presented it is a very positive way, because people have to buy in. They're not just lowering the age. You pay for a certain number of years, and then you're on Medicare, and instead of 65 or 62, it's now 55. No, you have to buy in at 55. So I think what she proposed is responsible. Is it good for everybody? They have to check themselves, and we'll see as a matter of public policy, because you have to always, does it deliver the service? Does it meet the needs of people it is intended to do? What is the impact on the deficit?
So we've talked about fiscal issues, but I know that people here, like everybody in America, I think around the world, are fascinated with the presidential race, and you are a key player. So let me ask you this.
Yes, ma'am.
Donald Trump, as you well know, is accusing Hillary Clinton of playing the woman card. You're the first woman, as you famously said, to break the marble ceiling, to become the first female House Speaker. If you were running against him, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think that Hillary's doing exactly what I think. Don't stoop to that level, really. Just keep it up here. What is your vision for the future? This is what the American people expect and deserve in a campaign. Elections are about the future. And I think Hillary's answer, if that means equal pay for equal work, paid sick leave, affordable child care, and retirement security, then deal me in. I thought that was a good answer. But I do think that this is so important that if there's anything that I could wish for, is that the debate would go to a level of real substance and not where it has been going. And she hasn't taken it to that place. I'm very proud of her candidacy. And Bernie's too. It's all about the issues. And that's, again, the legitimate debate in a campaign.
You are, I've watched you over the years, you are as good as they come, if not the best, when it comes to having political instincts. So given what you have witnessed in the Republican primary about, trying to stay high and trying to stay on the issues and not respond, do you really think that's going to work?
It has to. I mean, really, this is the United States of America. We are the greatest country that ever existed in the history of the world. Our founders, with their optimism and their hope, created a system for the first time in history based on the equality of people, and created founding documents that could be amended to ensure that. And they sacrificed everything, their lives, their liberty, their sacred honor, for this democracy, a government of the many, not a government of the money. And that is a piece of it that I think has to be extracted from the situation as well. And I think that's part of both Hillary Clinton and, Secretary Clinton and Senator Sanders' campaign, is to reduce the role of money in campaigns. Because an election is about who gets elected, but it's also about the tenor of how we take our country, and the world is watching. I just came from Latin America. I went to Mexico, took a big delegation to Mexico, Peru, and Chile, largely TPP, but also migration, and everything we do is about security first and foremost, our oaths to protect the American people. But down there, it was like, what is going to happen in the election? What is going to happen? All over the world, people are asking that question. And I think that we have to recognize our importance as a model democracy to have an election that is worthy of our founders' sacrifice, our soldiers' sacrifice, and our children's aspirations.
Trump said earlier this year that he's always had a good relationship with Nancy Pelosi.
Did he say that?
He did. Anything you want to add to that?
I also read in the paper, I read or see or something that he's contributed to me, which is not even true, but he hasn't said it, but
But do you know, how well do you know him? Can you give us some backstory?
I think I met him once, yes. I mean, I know I met him once. I met him once in his office. We went there to talk about things years ago, and he was a gentleman and lovely. And all of a sudden, but it's interesting. If you try to do what they did, I mean, here's how I see it: shrink the presidency, discredit even the birthright of the president to be president. Shrink his credentials academically in every way. Have a meeting the day you're elected to the majority to say the most important thing we can do is to make sure he doesn't succeed. If you kind of shrink the presidency, then a lot more people would be qualified to run for it, right? And if you live in a world of reality TV, shrunken president, reality TV, there you are. But I have great faith in the American people. I think that they will demand that this debate, okay, we've had our fun, now let's get serious. And not, again, respectful. I'm respectful of the fact that Donald Trump has been nominated, well, supposedly will be nominated, we assume will be nominated. The people have spoken. And by the way, I am not a supporter of superdelegates. I am one, but I don't support them. I haven't even endorsed yet in the election because I think that there should be no doubt that what the people say is what the outcome will be.
You just teed me up for my last question. Are you ready to endorse Hillary Clinton yet?
Well, not ready enough right here and now.
Why not? Don't you all want to hear if she's going to endorse?
Well, let me just say that the next president, whoever she may be, will be one of the best qualified people to enter the Oval Office by dint of knowledge, experience, vision, strategic thinking about how to get the job done. And if people see that as the standard, then maybe they'll measure other people by that standard as well. And I think that will recognizing our responsibility to the American people to not mistake cruelty for wit, not mistake vitriol for strength, but to remember that we are this beautiful country, a nation of immigrants, a nation of freedom. Aren't you proud to be Americans? I'm just so excited about our country every single day. The wisdom and vision of our founders, the sacrifice of our troops, which I mentioned. But most importantly for us, elections are about the future, so the aspirations of our children. It is essential that we reduce the role of money to make sure that the people's voices are the strongest forces for that change and for the outcome of those elections. I just want to close by thanking Pete Peterson once again for the focus on the deficit, because this is something that has to happen. It has to happen in a bipartisan way. It has to happen with public engagement, and it has to happen with shared sacrifice. It can't be, as Senator Whitehouse said, we want you to cut Social Security while we give tax cuts to the wealthiest people. He used the example of carried interest. So thank you for your interest in this subject. Know your power, the value of your ideas, and how that might be helpful in our coming to a place where we're on a path to not only deficit reduction, but elimination of the national debt, which would be a strength for our great country. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you.
Leader Pelosi, thank you. And let the record show there's only one she running for president. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.
And it's my duty to tell you that lunch is being served next door.